Welcome to Dude Feuds. I'm the B-Man from Verdicks. Joining me today are my fellow Verdicks founders, D-Rock and Nick. For more about Verdicks and the nonsense that we're up to, visit verdicks.com. Today, we're going to debate our first Dude Feud. This is based on the 1996 comedy film Happy Gilmore, starring Adam Sandler as Happy Gilmore and Christopher McDonald as the antagonist and golf pro Shooter McGavin. Denny has long held the belief that Shooter McGavin was the real victim of this film. He's going to argue tonight just to that point. I believe that Happy was the victim, and I'm going to argue the same on Happy's side. Nick's going to moderate for us. We'll each present some opening arguments, then we'll have a brief discussion followed by closing statements. This time, we're going to leave the verdict up to you. Help us settle this Dude Feud. You can comment down below on who you think will win this argument, so that we can finally bury our hatchets. With that, I'm going to plug our social media and then turn it over to Denny for his opening statement. So follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Verdicks. You can also follow us on YouTube. Just hit the subscribe button down below and give us a like if you like the video.
By the way, that's Verdicks.
Good, yeah, Verdicks. Think of a bunch of dudes giving silly opinions. D-Man, are you ready for your opening statement?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's get into this.
All right, fire away.
All right. Thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, well, not ladies, gentlemen of the well-hearing jury. Arguments you are about to hear against Shooter McGavin are simply a misunderstanding and ultimately a tale of unfortunate circumstances. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Shooter's actions or behavior were appropriate. What I will argue are that they were the actions of a man who was provoked and goaded into defending not only his livelihood, but the sport he loved. Did Shooter blow a 4-shot lead on the back nine of the 1996 Tour Championship? Sure. But his demise was not the act of a villain becoming unhinged, but rather the desperate plea for help to preserve the game of golf, the gentleman's game. He was not only wronged by those who he entrusted in preserving the sanctity of the game, but he was also made the victim of verbal and physical abuse for doing the right thing, playing by the rules. He worked hard, he paid his dues, he was an ambassador of the sport. He was not only deserving of the elusive Tour Championship jacket, he was robbed and cast aside by his organization he dedicated his life for in exchange for a violent buffoon. Simply put, playing against Happy Gilmore and his army of misfits would be akin to a chess champion having to play against Gritty or the Philly Fanatic. My final point leads us to the fact that Happy not only became unhinged and provoked him, he hired a deranged man who was living with the nail stuck in his head to attend, intimidate, and destroy Shooter's equipment. He destroyed his 9-iron, one of the most important irons in a golfer's bag. Rather than banishing the deranged menace, he was allowed to then later attend the Tour Championship, where he again proceeded to intimidate and assault Shooter. This not to mention follows, which should have been a drop ball. Remember when the ball landed on Frankenstein's fat foot and he was forced to play it off of it. In the regular rules of golf, this would have been a drop ball and Shooter would have gone on to win. Instead, he was forced to hit the ball against the rules and jeopardize his win. I'm sorry, I'm losing steam here. I'm running off track a little bit. But I would like to close by just stating that he was abandoned by the Professional Association of Golfers, and having seen the sanctity of the game denigrated to a frat party, he was left with no other choice but to defend himself and fight fire with fire. And with that, I turn this over to you.
Well, I certainly appreciate your points, but let me give you the real story here. This is a story of tragedy. It's a story of death, despair, and one man's God-given ability to overcome, even as those around him conspired to ruin him. Happy Gilmore was an at-risk youth. He was abandoned by his mother, and he was emotionally wrecked by the death of his father. And even after his father's death, His mother ignored him and did not come back to raise him, leaving him to be raised by his grandmother. However, she was in a very popular Kiss cover band, which traveled the country, and it left Happy all alone in an abandoned house for years on end. With all that money she was earning, she failed to pay the taxes, and Happy was left searching for solutions to clean up the mess she had made. In spite of all of this, he was able to become a plumber, a carpenter, a manager at a gas station, and yes, even a professional golfer. So let's go over some of these facts. With nearly zero training, Happy was able to become a professional golfer. He never broke the rules. He never cheated. Watch the whole film. He followed every rule of the game. Maybe not the social norms of the game. He just simply played to his one advantage he had, the long drive. He never invited those crowds, nor the celebrity that came with it. In fact, he was quite put off by it at first. He literally played every ball as it lied. His goal was simple: win money, and he did not care about the tournament nor the gold jacket. This was a job for him, not a career. Let me continue. Happy wanted to dress professionally, but his only suit was ruined by Shooter McGavin when he told him to meet him on the 9th green at 9. Shooter's co-conspirator, yes, he had a co-conspirator by the name of Virginia Vennet, had to be the only one who could have turned those sprinklers on. After all, she was the person who was out on the course that evening. Happy was also outright rejected by the sport until they realized that they could exploit him. The PGA management, Virginia, and even Chubbs saw the personal gain in Happy's success. For example, even when Shooter McGavin offered Happy Gilmore the opportunity to have the house outright in exchange for quitting, it was Virginia who continued to urge Happy Gilmore to play. It was all about her personal gain. Think about this. Virginia was a publicist. She could have told the true tale. She could have told of his grandmother's tax troubles and his efforts to save her. She could have told the story about Happy's girlfriend who first died in a car accident and then later died falling off a cliff. Or how he tutored a youth into how to toughen up for the hockey season. She could have told the story that Happy had fed an elderly woman some French fries and some burgers, and then he later saved that same woman from an air conditioner accident. She could have promoted him as the victim of a deranged fan who eventually ran him over with a car in an attempted murder. Let's not forget, Happy had also given a job to a homeless man. He protected the crowd from a bloodthirsty alligator. Happy was obviously in a lifelong battle with Tourette's syndrome. This clearly explains all of his outbursts and antics. They could have brought a lot of positive attention to that cause itself. Even the banks were against Happy Gilmore. They never allowed him to cash those large checks, which he had to stash in the backseat of his car. Because Virginia was conspiring with Shooter, both of them did this to Happy Gilmore. One last thing. Shooter came into this with a chip on his shoulder. Happy approached Shooter and his friends with positivity. He wanted to have a beer and exchange some stories. He wanted to play in the arcade with them. Happy wasn't trying to beat Shooter. He was just trying to make a few bucks. He wasn't even good at golf. Shooter was still winning all of those games. He wasn't a threat. Shooter was given the privilege and access to the tour director, which undermined Happy Gilmore. It was Shooter who arranged for fan interference and an attempted murder. Shooter also tried to steal Happy's house and made inappropriate passes at his grandmother. Think about this. Happy Gilmore is the victim of this movie. Denny, would you like to address some of my comments?
I will address a lot of your comments. A lot of them stem back to how you are alleging that Happy Gilmore did not cheat or that he played with inside of the rules of the game. And I'm going to point out the many ways in which the game was modified and the rules were changed to benefit Happy Gilmore.
Let's hear it.
This was all done to allow him to win and allow him to continue to compete. First, we're going to start off with the fact that golf rules state that anyone who receives payment for playing, advising, or teaching the game of golf is considered a professional and not an amateur and must be registered as such. Happy Gilmore, hustling his golf skills for money at the driving range as a competitive ball driver, makes him a professional. He knew what he was doing. He was receiving money for it and should have registered as that. He should have never been able to play, let alone qualify for the tour events as an amateur at the Waterford Open.
That's true.
Yep.
Another point.
Fair enough.
While at the Waterford Open, or Waterbury Open, I'm sorry, Happy whiffs on his first shot at the Waterbury Open. Chubbs, acting his caddy, his second caddy, which is also not allowed, calls timeout, which is not allowed in the game of golf, and they allow it to occur. They also allow Chubbs to be on the green with Happy to continue coaching him throughout this entire process, talking to him, helping him walk his way to a 4-putt win. And no one says anything. They continue to allow this to happen because he's energetic and enigmatic, and this is going to help make them a lot of money while bringing Shooter down. I can keep going, but I'll give you a couple counterpoints if you would like.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
No timeouts in golf. Can't you just not take your shot for as long as you want?
Could just kind of dick around the way they do.
No, there are actually rules about the timing of the game. You cannot delay or hold up the process of the game from being played. And you certainly can't receive coaching from anyone outside of your caddy.
I will say in response to this that there were no other objections from other golfers. In fact, others welcomed him. I will also say that the PGA Tour manager, Doug, was on hand for almost every single event. He was clearly able to identify rule changes and rule problems off the bat. He was the one who stated that you must hit the ball where it lies. That's what the rule says. Doug was there. If the highest guy is there, what he says goes, regardless of what the rules in 1996 were.
No, that's not true. Doug had a personal agenda. Again, he wanted Happy to succeed for the fame and success that it would bring to the sport. Think about the fact that golf has very specific rules about clubs, club sizes, width, and everything. And yet Happy Gilmore was allowed to putt with a modified putter made to look like a hockey stick. That is not allowed under the rules of the game. There was also, I allege, that Doug, who conveniently happened to be at every event, may have been fixing the score to allow Happy to be more competitive, especially in the championship.
Now, those are all allegations. I feel like in a court of law, you have to have evidence to back up claims. Like
here's my allegation.
I'm saying objection, because you're leading the witnesses right now.
Here's my allegation. In the final round,
bring an allegation. You have to have evidence.
Final round of the Tour Championship, Happy Gilmore makes at least a quadruple bogey on a hole, but somehow only drops one shot on the leaderboard. How does this happen if someone is not rigging the game in his favor?
It's because Shooter simultaneously made mistakes. You will remember when the participant in the crowd inexplicably yells, "Shooter's got a choke!" And then Shooter hits one into the water, costing him 2 strokes on that instance.
Yeah, and Shooter also had to try and chip on the 17th while there are 2 fat bikers doing it in the woods. It's all unfair. It was not, these are not allowed. This is not allowed as part of the game. This is not allowed as part of the fan behavior. And they turned it into a frat party because that's what allowed Happy to succeed. Happy Gilmore couldn't hit the ball with the silent crowd. He had to inject and incite the crowd to make some noise for him to allow him to be distracted enough to hit a long ball, which is all that he was
Happy Gilmore's powers did not come from the crowd. They came from within. His first couple shots were without crowd noise. He was uncomfortable in the silence, but he didn't need the crowd to amp him up. He only played to it once they were allowed. Let's not forget, it was a large and economically diverse crowd. So they had different reasons for being there.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just in the middle, but I have to point out that this was a nationally televised championship golf tournament. If there were violations of rules, there would be video evidence, and I believe Happy would probably be stripped of his title upon review. As far as I recall, that didn't happen.
I would also like to point out that, Brian, you declared that Happy Gilmore was embraced by his fellow golfers. And this is not true, as evidenced by the many times Lee Trevino was shown with a very concerned and disapproving shake of his head towards Happy Gilmore. And then Bob Barker, who was a student of the game and a well-respected man who playing on a celebrity pro tour pro-am, was assaulted by Happy Gilmore for not being accepting of his outlandish style of play.
Wrong. That's not what caused the fight. I watched the movie 3 times today. Happy Gilmore was nothing but kind to Bob Barker, except for the one point where he mistakenly called his show Let's Make a Deal. That upset Bob Barker. Bob Barker continued to chastise and prod Happy Gilmore until Happy Gilmore was left with nothing left to do but to strike Bob Barker.
Which should have warranted an automatic, more than just a suspension, because this is not the first time Happy Gilmore has struck someone on a golf course. He also punched out a guy for saying, "You've got to be kidding me." He assaulted a wildlife, which is also not allowed. You're not allowed to.
His caddy.
His caddy. Yeah, he attacked his first caddy, not tripped to the ground, threw him down.
Again, this is a man with documented Tourette's. He has a medical excuse for his outbursts, and he's trying to overcome them.
No, it's because studies show that children that come from broken families are typically more violent. And he showed his violent tendencies. They were constantly on display. And the Golf Association constantly just covered it up and made excuses for him. His girlfriend,
let's talk about favoritism.
We're in cahoots and made excuses for him to allow him to continue to compete.
After the incident with Bob Barker, why was Shooter McGavin allowed to be in the private meeting with Doug, the PGA Tour manager, and Happy Gilmore? How is that fair? How does that not scream privilege? That's also the instance where we come to find out that Shooter McGavin now knows about Happy Gilmore's tax troubles.
But if he plays, it's the same reason that a union rep is allowed into the room for, NFL decisions, or you saw the Super Bowl and Russell Wilson is sitting up in the press box with Roger Goodell. It doesn't mean that there's conspiring going on. It's just that they have someone else who is well respected and at the top of the game involved in some of the decisions makings because they know what's best for the game.
Let's address these following crimes that were committed by Shooter McGavin. Accessory to assault, cheating, bribery, sabotage, conspiracy, attempted theft, and attempted murder. How do you plead to these?
Shooter McGavin was antagonized into reacting the way he did.
He was not. Happy Gilmore was not his enemy. Happy Gilmore did not care about Shooter McGavin.
Here we go.
Happy Gilmore was not trying to win.
In their first introduction, Shooter McGavin invited Happy Gilmore to a special golfers only party on the 9th green at 9 p.m. He mistakenly gave him the wrong location and time. And instead of saying, "I'm sorry about that," he was immediately threatened by Happy Gilmore. He then goes forth and purchases Happy Gilmore's childhood home from an IRS tax auction, only to keep it out of the hands of a stranger from getting it and offers it to him. Not only that, he then tells Happy, "Tell you what, you can have the house. I will let your grandmother live in this house and she can be my maid." He offers her employment, money that she could then turn around and give back to the IRS, which she has no plans of doing because she is a tax fraud and a cheat, just like her grandson.
These are points that are hard to argue against, other than I would
still
say
feel like we haven't addressed the attempted murder. Like, that's not okay.
Yeah, well, clearly, Shooter McGavin
Antagonized.
Do all bullies attempt murder, or know?
Let's circle back to when they finally re-met again after the incident at the special golfers party that was missed. Shooter or Happy are having an engaged in conversation.
We're talking about the
And
glass breaking.
Happy admits that he is not a golfer. He's a hockey player, and that he only joined the tour for one reason, for making money. And then he quickly followed that up with stating, "But I have a new reason, kicking your ass." He then brandishes a weapon by breaking a glass bottle and threatening Shooter's life with it. This is a long history of violence that he has displayed throughout time, with beating up his coach for selecting a player that was better than him on a hockey team, taking his skate off and trying to stab somebody, numerous fits of rage and outbursts towards fans, celebrities. The IRS agent that came to the house was thrown through a glass door, the ball for not going into its home, an alligator for being in its natural place, so on the golf, its natural habitat, and happened to be swallowing a ball. His girlfriend for trying to leave the abusive relationship, and the private property of a local mini golf establishment. And despite all of this, he was never banned or punished for any of it. He was celebrated.
I have to say, you're kicking
Pretty
my ass
tough.
in this argument. I don't have enough research to back up any of those points, other than to say that he has a documented medical condition, which leads to these outbursts, and the medical exception to join the field. I will have to say that, it was Shooter McGavin who lied, who cheated, who stole. Happy Gilmore did none of those things. I'll grant you that Shooter McGavin was threatened by Happy Gilmore, specifically with a bottle. But you'll remember in that scene, Shooter McGavin says, "Put that on my tab," as if he was handing him the weapon in provocation.
He was extending an olive branch as an apology for giving him the wrong time and location for the golfers only party on the 9th at 9:00.
You've certainly made a solid case here.
And look, I'm not going to sit here and say that Shooter McGavin is not a jerk or a bad boy, but he certainly wasn't a villain and an evil guy. He, this is like John McEnroe of the tennis world, of the golf world. He was the bad boy, but he was damn good, and he was threatened by that, and he was then threatened by Happy Gilmore and abandoned by the golf association that he worked so hard to build up and make his legacy with. And they turned their back on him to prop up Happy Gilmore for ratings.
They used Happy Gilmore for ratings and for personal benefit. Chubbs wanted to get himself back into the game of golf. He wanted the gold jacket. Victoria wanted to have the highest ratings possible and to become the most popular, or Virginia wanted to become the most popular publicist. Shooter McGavin just got jealous. It's nothing more than pure jealousy. Happy Gilmore was not a threat. He was not going to win the tournament until Shooter McGavin provoked it. He told you in that same statement, "I'm only doing this for the money, but since you're being such an asshole to me, now I'm going to try to beat you." Shooter McGavin would have won the jacket had Happy Gilmore just continued to play and lose and, get 5th place.
You will remember Shooter McGavin said, when threatened with, "Now I've got a second reason, kicking your ass." Shooter McGavin clearly states, "I'd like to see you try." He was then threatened with a broken bottle. And then Shooter McGavin said, "I meant on the golf course." He was very clear and very specific. He said, "I meant on the golf course." He was going to beat him on the golf course. Happy Gilmore wanted to beat him within an inch of his life and stab him to death just for making that comment.
Well, let's talk about Shooter McGavin hiring a hitman, because if there's not a more obvious example of cheating, of going a full attempt to murder another player, Shooter McGavin brought that on. He disgraced the game by having somebody, 1, drive on a golf course, 2, hit another player, and 3, cause damage to the stands and crowd.
This was all reactionary. Remember, Mr. Larson, Happy Gilmore's former employer and associate, was an invited guest, not once, but twice, to 2 different tour events. He should have been suspended from being allowed to attend any event after the first incident, in which he intimidated, and destroyed Shooter McGavin's property. But then he was allowed to come back a second time and do the same thing. He beat him up at the end of the movie. He beats him up just before Happy Gilmore so that he doesn't have to do it. His reactions, he was simply hiring help to meet fire with fire.
So your timeline's a little messed up because he didn't beat him up until the end of the movie after Happy had already won. So you can't count that into the decision to hire a hitman.
And you'll remember
But it threatened him though when he said, "And you can count on me."
But are you gonna say that the bending of a 9-iron, the equal reaction and provocation is to hire a hitman?
You cannot replace clubs in the middle of match play. So he now has to finish that game without his 9-iron, which could have affected his play. And again, this all is eroding at someone's psyche. So I'm not going to say he wasn't in a desperate state when he hired this, hitman to give equal threats to Happy Gilmore, but he also didn't tell him to get the VW bug, to drive it onto the course and to hit him. Just as much as you're alleging that it wasn't Happy's fans' fault. For Happy's fans, you could allege, are responsible for allowing him to win by climbing onto the radio tower and bringing it down.
Now we're getting political.
Allowing him to make an impossible putt, which only he could have made.
All right.
His fans climbed that and pulled it down.
So
force play would have allowed that to have been cleared.
So hypothetical question. In an alternative universe where Happy Gilmore is the consummate golf professional, but happens to still have the ability to drive the ball, eliminate the short game, and all he has to do is basically drive and putt. And he starts beating Shooter McGavin. Do you believe that Shooter McGavin would handle the losses gracefully? Or do you think he would take some of the actions that he did in the movie?
No, I think he would have handled it gracefully because there's no record or documentation in the movie of him acting or behaving that way towards other golfers, which clearly had beaten him for many years and won the tour championship. You see at the beginning of the movie at the social hour when he's socializing with the other golfers, telling jokes. He's telling the Doug David Hasselhoff, guy spends more time in the sand than at the beach, joke. So
which only goes to show
well liked and well respected.
What type of phony he actually is, using the same jokes over and over, telling people that there was something in the Seattle water to make them want to stay. This was just all fodder from a man who is deeply, deeply sick.
These are the words of an ambassador of a sport. It's the same way that every sports fan, the Super Bowl winning quarterback says to, we have the best fans in the world every time, no matter where he's playing. It's all just canned lines that they're feeding. And he's just being an ambassador of the sport and promoting and trying to get more attention to it. And Happy Gilmore brought the wrong attention to the sport.
Fair enough. I guess we can go into some closing statements. And if you don't mind, I'll go first here.
Sure.
Perfect. I want everybody to know that Shooter McGavin, he was a classic narcissist. He was an older white man who was threatened by change. He was afraid of both a large and economically diverse crowd, and he was afraid that people aside from white guys were starting to enjoy the sport. Shooter made it personal. Happy wasn't winning the tournaments. He was just cashing checks. Happy didn't want the gold title, the gold jacket. And Shooter let his need for attention be his downfall. Again, he co-conspired with the golf community, with Virginia, and with others to ruin Happy. He even hired an evil caretaker at the elderly home that he owned just to abuse Happy's grandmother. Happy was just never given a chance. He was a victim of circumstance, manipulation, and abuse. And through all this, he never gave up. Happy Gilmore played by the rules, even when they were rigged against him. He used passion and skill to overcome this tragedy. He's the true hero. And Shooter was a poor sport. He was a liar, a cheat, and a jerk. Even after his attempts to foil Happy fail, he still tried to run off with his golden jacket. He became everything that he was afraid of, a loser. Lastly, do not feel bad for Shooter McGavin, because according to this 2016 golf.com article, which I will share with you now, if I could just figure out how to share it right now. Where's all my buttons? Damn it. Shooter McGavin went on to win 4 more tours. He also won the 1997 tour. The year after, Happy Gilmore failed to make it back into the league. Don't feel bad for Shooter McGavin. He had plenty of wins. He wasn't a victim. It was Happy Gilmore who was the victim. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna keep mine short, but I don't agree with your assessment there. He was provoked and acted appropriately. He tried to do the right thing multiple times, buying him drinks, buying a house, providing shelter for his grandmother, providing her with an income so that she could pay back her past due taxes to the IRS. But what I do want to talk to you about and appeal to you about is Shooter's disability. Unlike Happy Gilmore, Shooter McGavin had a disability and the rules were not changed the way they were for Happy Gilmore to accommodate for that. He played with the disability at the highest level possible, winning multiple tour championships after these events. He should have won even more had the league stepped in and actually suspended Happy Gilmore for his crude, unnecessary, and illegal behavior. He never used it as a crutch the way that Happy did, though. The crowd noise, the bully attitude. And the audience, quite frankly, was never informed of Shooter's disability until he was putting in his jacket order when he thought he had won the 1996 tournament. He wore a 44 long, and his right arm was a little longer than his left. No rules were changed to accommodate for this.
What fucking rules would you change?
Yet, if one arm is shorter than the other, you have to overcome and adapt and work that much harder. But they didn't say, oh, you can hit off of a shorter tee box. You can play with a larger club head size. You can make modifications. No, these are all things that they did for Happy Gilmore, though. Happy Gilmore routinely broke the rules, was granted variances from the rules in order to allow him to succeed. And for all these reasons that I previously stated, and even with his disability, Shooter should have been rewarded and celebrated for his professionalism, decorum, and having overcome such insurmountable odds. Instead, he was left beaten, battered, and bruised. And with that, I rest my case.
Fair enough. I rest my case as well. We hope that you guys enjoyed this dude feud. It was our first one. It's a little shaky. We hope to do more. So let us know what you think. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and share this video with your friends. Leave us your verdict in the comments down below. And lastly, follow Verdicks on Instagram, Twitter, and at verdicks.com, verdicks.com. There's a link in the bio. Follow us for more nonsense. And until next time, shields up, dudes. Shields up.
Shields up.